Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of Stephen King's most epic tales, TheStand. Often described as a grand, post-apocalyptic clash between good and evil, this novel, and later TV miniseries has fascinated fans for decades. In this video, we'll explore 10 intriguing facts you might not know about TheStand, from its surprising origins to its memorable characters and adaptations. So buckle up and get ready to rediscover a King classic like never before. Number 1. Roots of the novel. Stephen King explains that TheStand is simply a story about the end of the world, where we see survivors who lived through the apocalypse try to pick up the pieces. One half of the survivors is led by a source of good, whereas the other half is led by a source of evil. The roots of this story can be traced as far back as 1969, when King wrote a short story called Night Surf, which featured a deadly flu virus. He got his influence from a 1968 incident in which 6,000 sheep died in the state of Utah due to supposed chemical testing. When King decided to expand on the Captain Trips virus and write TheStand, he did so by creating an epic Lord of the Rings-styled fantasy. It became a tale of heroes who must go on a long journey to defeat evil, only, according to King, in his Lord of the Rings-inspired epic there was no hobbit but a Texan called Stu, and no Dark Lord but a supernatural drifter called Randall Flagg. King even jokes that he doesn't remember anyone singing, "Baby, Can You Dig Your Man?" in Lord of the Rings. In looking more deeply at these origins, it becomes evident that TheStand was King's attempt to fuse modern American culture with classic heroic archetypes. While Tolkien's work deals with mythical realms, swords, and sorcery, King's vision unfolds on highways littered with stalled cars, abandoned malls, and small towns that have been erased by a superflu. King took the real-life horror of chemical and biological weapons and imagined what would happen if a top-secret government facility accidentally allowed a lethal pathogen to escape. The reference to the thousands of sheep in Utah underscores King's awareness of how human negligence or malice can wreak incredible havoc on the environment, and on society itself. Night Surf was a stepping stone, hinting at a post-apocalyptic world consumed by illness. With TheStand, King transformed those hints into a sprawling epic about humanity's potential resilience in the face of annihilation. Another fascinating element at this early stage is how King's apocalyptic setting lets him dive into the psychological turmoil faced by survivors. In a world decimated by plague, each new day is a struggle not just for physical survival but also for emotional and spiritual well-being. The idea of dividing the survivors between good and evil underscores a larger metaphor of moral choice. Stripped of law, modern infrastructure, and reliable institutions, each person must answer an urgent question: do I seek community and compassion, or do I embrace tyranny and cruelty? This tension becomes the beating heart of TheStand, and it all traces back to a short story about a flu virus that King wrote while still exploring themes of fear, destruction, and redemption in his early career. By referencing the Lord of the Rings, King gave himself a roadmap for a journey-based narrative that involves a band of individuals traveling across great distances to face an evil presence. Yet the evil is not some remote entity like Sauron in a tower. Instead, it has a strangely charismatic, denim-clad persona named Randall Flagg. And though Stu Redman is no hobbit, he embodies the unassuming everyman who discovers hidden courage within himself. These parallels highlight King's creative ambition to overlay the structure of a timeless fantasy quest onto a modern, disease-ravaged United States. Because of this structure, readers see deserted highways, sinister dreams, and small enclaves that eventually band together to form new communities, a panorama that resonates on a mythic level while maintaining the recognizable trappings of contemporary America. Number 2. Drastic cuts had to be made. Given that King was writing a Lord of the Rings-inspired masterpiece, naturally it was going to be one big epic novel. By the time King finished TheStand's manuscript, it consisted of a whopping 1,200 pages and weighed 12 pounds. King joked that it weighed the same amount as a bowling ball. The publishing company Doubleday told King they couldn't publish a 1,200-page book because the glue used to bind the pages would fall apart. So King had to do what no creator wants to do: cut huge chunks of his story, removing 400 pages to be precise. However, King also used this editing exercise to improve his story, adding elements such as the inclusion of the trashcan man and a scene where the characters seek refuge from a twister. Finally, in 1978, TheStand was published and went on to become a bestseller. The tension between King's sprawling creative ambitions and the publishing world's physical limitations is an intriguing story in itself. The cuts might seem shocking. Losing 400 pages is tantamount to losing an entire standalone novel, but the author used the opportunity to streamline and refine the narrative. He introduced new scenes that helped balance the story, such as further developing Trashcan Man, a disturbed individual whose fascination with fire and destruction leads him to Randall Flagg. The addition of a twister scene, meanwhile, underscores the notion that in this ravaged world, even nature seems to turn violently against humanity. When the trimmed version was finally published, it still possessed the magnitude and depth that King had envisioned, and it quickly captured the imagination of readers who were drawn to a world teetering on the brink of moral and societal collapse. King's frustration at having to trim his grand opus would eventually lead to the release of an uncut edition years later. In 1990, a new version of TheStand hit shelves, restoring much of the material removed during the initial publication. This expanded edition remains a point of debate among fans. Some prefer the leaner, faster-paced 1978 edition, while others relish the extra layers of character development and world-building found in the expanded version. Either way, the novel's success helped cement King's reputation as the master of contemporary horror fantasy. Moreover, the uncut edition served as a testament to the enduring popularity of the story, proving that readers were hungry for every nuance King had to offer. The continuing appeal of TheStand, in any version, reveals that apocalyptic fiction, when handled with King's fusion of grand stakes and intimate character arcs, can captivate audiences decades after its initial release. A noteworthy part of these revisions involves the Trashcan Man's extensive backstory. He evolves from a minor, albeit memorable, character into one of the major wildcards in the conflict between good and evil. Without the expansions, readers might not fully grasp his traumatic childhood and his deep-seated fixation on flames, which ultimately make him a prime candidate for Flagg's manipulative influence. King often creates characters who are psychologically fragile, underscoring how chaos attracts those who have been pushed to society's margins. These expansions consequently enrich the entire structure of TheStand, showcasing how even background figures can become pivotal to the epic's climax. The editing journey, therefore, is not only a publishing anecdote but also a lens through which we can see how crucial each character arc is to King's carefully orchestrated vision of a post-apocalyptic America. Number 3. Origins of the name. The story's name, TheStand, is obviously a reference to the struggle of good versus evil in which the heroes take a stand against the forces of darkness for the good of humankind. Interestingly, King got the title from a Bruce Springsteen song, Jungleland. This isn't the first time King got one of his book titles from a song lyric. The Shining got its name from the John Lennon song, Instant Karma, which featured the lyric, We All Shine On. Springsteen's 1975 song featured the lyric, Tonight there's fallen angels and they're waiting for us down in the street, as we take our stand. That line struck a chord with King and resonated with his story, inspiring him to call his tale TheStand. Music has often been a deep well of inspiration for King, whose references to rock and roll abound in his novels. By linking his epic to a Bruce Springsteen lyric, King ties the novel's grand conflict to a distinctly modern form of poetry, the street-level grit and yearning in Springsteen's songs. Where Tolkien might quote ancient languages and mythic verse, King channels the raw energy of 1970s American rock, mirroring the modern anxieties, dreams, and disillusionments that color TheStand. Through the title alone, readers sense that this is not a detached fantasy with archaic, otherworldly lords and creatures. Instead, it's a story anchored in the reality of everyday Americans who find themselves forced to rise against an evil presence beyond comprehension. Moreover, King's habit of taking titles from song lyrics underscores his broader method of weaving popular culture into his narrative tapestry. By referencing Springsteen for TheStand and John Lennon for The Shining, King situates his horror fantasy worlds in the realm of real cultural icons, forging an immediate connection with readers who recognize those musical allusions. This infusion of pop culture helps ground the extraordinary elements, like superflus and otherworldly villains, in a familiar context. Even though the events unfolding in TheStand are epic and cataclysmic, the mention of a Springsteen lyric reminds us that these are ordinary folks encountering the unimaginable. The subsequent tension between grounded realism and supernatural terror is precisely what has made King's fiction so enduringly popular. Number 4. The Stand was going to be a theatrical movie directed by George A. Romero. King always felt that The Stand could be converted into a movie, and throughout the 1980s he tried to get a theatrical version of The Stand off the ground. He teamed up with film director and friend George A. Romero to bring The Stand to the big screen, which made sense since during the 80s the horror pair worked on several projects together, namely the anthology movie Creepshow. However, despite trying to shorten The Stand for a feature-length movie, King struggled to condense it. At one stage he even considered splitting The Stand into 2 parts, something that has, ironically, recently happened with his It novel. King was then approached to make The Stand into a miniseries for ABC, consisting of 4 two-hour episodes. Number 5. Potential Flags. The Shining had Jack Nicholson, it had Tim Curry, so the big question was, who was going to be the next memorable Stephen King villain? When it came time to cast the miniseries main villain, the comically charming yet utterly evil Randall Flagg, several actors were considered. These included Christopher Walken, James Woods, Jeff Goldblum, and Willem Dafoe. All of them turned down the role. It was then decided to cast an unknown actor, so Chicago Hope star Jamie Sheridan took on the Randall Flagg mantle. He injected humor, power, and an oddly appealing evil charm into the character. Sheridan's performance is considered a highlight of the Stand miniseries, and Randall Flagg became a fan favorite. Still, just imagine if Christopher Walken had been cast as Randall Flagg. That would have been awesome. Yes indeed, that most definitely would have been awesome. Number 6. King also wrote the miniseries Screenplay. There was plenty of great talent behind the Stand miniseries, including none other than Stephen King himself, who wrote the screenplay. This made sense, as a pet peeve of King's has often been seeing filmmakers butcher his stories when adapting them. The Stand was directed by Mick Garris, a big-time Hollywood screenwriter who wrote scripts for movies such as Batteries Not Included, Critters 2, The Fly 2, and Hocus Pocus. The series score was composed by W.G. Snuffy Walden, who had worked on TV shows such as The Wonder Years and Roseanne, and who would later go on to compose for The West Wing. Interestingly, The Stand features cameos by horror movie directors. Stephen King himself appears as a character called Teddy, alongside Evil Dead and Spider-Man trilogy director Sam Raimi and An American Werewolf in London director John Landis. Child's Play and Fright Night director Tom Holland also makes an appearance, not to be confused with the actor Tom Holland who plays Spider-Man. King's direct involvement in writing the screenplay was a significant factor for fans who were eager to see The Stand faithfully adapted. Over the years, some adaptations of King's work have diverged from his original vision, sparking controversy. King's dissatisfaction with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is widely known, and that experience may have contributed to his desire to handle The Stand more personally. By crafting the teleplay himself, King could preserve essential subplots, characters, and themes that might otherwise have been lost. At the same time, network television in the early 1990s was still bound by content restrictions. Extreme gore or explicit sexual content was not feasible for a primetime audience, so King had to adapt his narrative accordingly, sometimes leaving the more graphic horrors implied rather than overtly shown. The miniseries also displays a unique camaraderie among genre creators, as evidenced by those cameo appearances from Raimi, Landis, and others. Their presence isn't just a quick on-screen gimmick, it's a reflection of the tight-knit community of horror filmmakers who respect King's contributions to the genre. It also ties The Stand to a broader lineage of horror films, indicating that it's part of a living tradition rather than a standalone production. Whenever these directors appear in cameo roles, savvy viewers get the sense that King's world-building extends beyond just the story itself and into the culture of horror filmmaking. Meanwhile, Mick Garris's directorial style ties the episodes together with a sense of fluid pacing, balancing quieter character-building scenes with more harrowing moments of apocalyptic dread. Number 7. The original home media release was drastically cut. The Stand got a home video release in the 1990s by Warner Brothers, which consisted of 2 VHS tapes. However, despite having 2 tapes, it was still heavily cut. Many scenes that viewers remembered from the TV broadcast were missing from the VHS edition. This wasn't the first time a King miniseries was condensed. When the Salem's Lot miniseries came out, it was cut down to an hour and a half for a theatrical release, and both it and the Tommyknockers were also heavily cut for their VHS releases. Interestingly, both it and TheStand had most of their cuts made toward the later parts of the story rather than distributing the cuts evenly. With the arrival of DVD, TheStand was released again, this time not by Warner Brothers. In Australia, for example, it was released on DVD by Paramount Pictures. Thankfully, all the cut scenes from the VHS release were restored. Entire subplots that had been removed were returned, so fans could finally see TheStand in its entirety. This story of cuts and restorations reflects a broader dynamic in adapting King's complex narratives. Because these miniseries typically ran for several nights on network TV, they could occupy more airtime than a standard movie. Yet when companies prepared VHS releases, they might have had different length requirements or believed the audience's attention span necessitated a shorter product. The final episodes, where the ultimate confrontation unfolds, often ended up trimmed the most, leading to a disjointed viewing experience for those who only saw the condensed home video editions. Many fans who purchased those cassettes felt disappointed, as entire plot threads simply vanished. The eventual DVD release gave the miniseries a second life, offering an uncut version that restored the missing scenes and provided a more coherent story arc. Between the printed page and the television screen, TheStand has always struggled to fit within conventional packaging, be it a single-volume paperback or a set of VHS tapes. Its epic scope, large cast of characters, and intricate subplots all demand a generous format, hence why the uncut DVD and later Blu-ray or streaming renditions remain the go-to ways for modern fans to experience the adaptation in its intended form. Number 8. Comic book adaptation. From 2008 to 2012, Marvel Comics published a stand comic book series based on King's novel. The artwork in this series is both awe-inspiring and terrifying, often resembling a vivid nightmare. Because a comic book isn't restricted by TV censors, unlike the 1994 miniseries, it could fully showcase shocking imagery that would not have been allowed on television at that time. Not only could the comic expand on visuals and shock factor, but it also included elements from King's original, unpublished 1,200-page manuscript for TheStand, finally giving fans a glimpse of his complete vision. And yes, since Marvel published it, you can technically say that TheStand is part of the Marvel universe. Just imagine Randall Flagg with the Infinity Gauntlet, that would doom us all. The adaptation's artistic freedom enabled Marvel's team to depict the apocalypse with a starkness that sometimes surpasses both the miniseries and the novel's narrative descriptions. Panoramic illustrations of abandoned cities, horrifying depictions of plague victims, and surreal dreamscapes featuring Mother Abigail or Randall Flagg could be rendered in dramatic detail. The comic series also allowed for a more methodical pacing, given that it was released in multiple issues over several years. Readers could linger on a specific moment, say, the heartbreak of a child left orphaned by the plague or the eerie quiet of a once bustling metropolis, without the narrative needing to rush onward. The inclusion of scenes drawn from King's unpublished materials allowed the Marvel version to serve almost like a historical excavation of the story. Longtime fans who had read both versions of the novel could discover new facets of King's apocalyptic vision, from additional bits of character backstory to previously missing transitions in the storyline. These additions enriched the thematic weight of TheStand, reinforcing the idea that the battle between good and evil is multi-layered, involving personal demons, societal breakdown, and cosmic destiny. Although the concept of TheStand coexisting within the Marvel universe is more tongue-in-cheek than canonical, it does highlight the ever-expanding nature of King's fictional worlds and how seamlessly they can intersect with popular culture at large. Number 9. A real-life illness led to a recast. TheStand features many well-known actors. Some big Hollywood names even show up in smaller roles, like Ed Harris and Kathy Bates, both of whom went uncredited. One interesting casting story involves Judge Ferris. Initially, Moses Gunn was cast in this role, but he became increasingly ill in the early days of filming. Sadly, he had to leave the production, and he passed away in 1993, a year before the miniseries aired. Famed film and television star Ossie Davis then took on the part. He got the role partly because he was spending time on set anyway, as his wife Ruby Dee was playing the pivotal role of Mother Abigail. By the way, Ruby Dee was not really 108 years old like her character, she was actually 71. She was just under heavy makeup, which is impressive. Viewers often assumed she was genuinely that old. The presence of Ed Harris and Kathy Bates in cameo capacities underscores how even big stars gravitated toward King's adaptation. Harris appears briefly as General Starkey, a military officer grappling with the knowledge that Captain Trips has spiraled out of control. Kathy Bates plays Ray Flowers, a radio broadcaster clinging to the hope of informing the public about the pandemic. These uncredited roles highlight the broad appeal of King's work and how respected he was among Hollywood veterans. Often, such actors step in for cameo appearances as personal favors or due to a mutual appreciation of the source material. Moses Gunn's untimely departure and subsequent passing cast a somber note on the production, illustrating the real-life adversities that can occur behind the scenes. Ossie Davis stepping into the role demonstrates how the miniseries, much like the novel, adapts to unforeseen challenges. Davis's close relationship with Ruby Dee also adds a layer of sweetness to the story, as both of them, legends in their own right, contributed to the success of TheStand. Ruby Dee's portrayal of Mother Abigail was especially poignant. Playing a character far older than herself required extensive prosthetic and makeup work, yet she brought an authentic warmth and dignity to the role. For many viewers, Mother Abigail's unwavering faith anchors the entire conflict, contrasting sharply with Randall Flagg's nihilistic hunger for chaos. In turn, Davis's portrayal of Judge Ferris, though relatively brief, injected further gravitas into the good side of the conflict. Number 10. The return of Randall Flagg. It seems that, just like Pennywise, Randall Flagg is a personal favorite of Stephen King's, and he would go on to appear, or be referenced, in several of King's other works. He makes his return in the novel The Eyes of the Dragon, published in 1984, 5 years after TheStand, where he is depicted as a sinister wizard. We learn that as far back as medieval times, Flagg was already trying to plunge the world into chaos. He also goes on to be the main villain in the Dark Tower series, where he tries to take control of the powerful Dark Tower, the linchpin of existence. One thing is for sure, Randall Flagg's main goal is chaos. He wants to see civilization crumble so that he can rise from the ashes and take control. The character would be played by Matthew McConaughey in the 2017 The Dark Tower movie, going by one of Flagg's aliases, Walter, also known as the Man in Black. So, who played the best live-action Randall Flagg, Jamie Sheridan or Matthew McConaughey? TheStand is a great tale of good versus evil, the ultimate battle rising from the ashes of a ravaged society. The miniseries may seem a bit corny by today's standards, where the evil side is all leather jackets and the good side is all humble folks in checkered shirts, but it's still quite enjoyable. The first episode, which shows the virus outbreak, is intense and remains shocking. I, for one, would be up for a modern movie interpretation of TheStand. As with the modern It movies, I think it should be split into a series of films. Number 11. A refreshing change for Molly Ringwald and Rob Lowe. Molly Ringwald, Franny, was best known for her roles in John Hughes's teen movies, The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles. Taking on a more grown-up, survivalist character was a new challenge. She has mentioned in interviews that TheStand allowed her to explore a more dramatic role, trading adolescent angst for existential dread. Rob Lowe, Nick Andrus, immersed himself in learning about deafness, even wearing earplugs to simulate the experience of hearing loss on set. He cited Nick as one of his most demanding roles because the character communicates emotions and thoughts primarily through gestures and facial expressions rather than dialogue. Number 12. Joe Bob Briggs and other cameos. In addition to cameos by Sam Raimi, John Landis, Tom Holland, and Stephen King himself, there's a lesser-known cameo by John Bloom, better known as Joe Bob Briggs, a cult horror host and film critic. He briefly appears as a police officer. These appearances weren't merely thrown in for fun, they underscore the tight-knit community of horror creators who often collaborate and cross-promote each other's work. Number 13. Special effects for the Hand of God in the climactic Las Vegas sequence, a supernatural phenomenon, often referred to as the Hand of God, manifests as a bright light. Given the limited CGI technology in the early 1990s, the visual effects crew combined high-intensity lighting, slow-motion photography, and optical compositing techniques. They reportedly took multiple takes to ensure that the final effect looked supernatural yet not too cheesy by 1990s TV standards. Number 14. Awards recognition. TheStand received 6 Primetime Emmy nominations, including categories for Outstanding Makeup and Outstanding Sound. While it didn't sweep the awards, the nominations acknowledged the miniseries' impressive achievement in world building, from convincingly depicting a lethal virus to crafting haunting sets and sound design for a nation brought to its knees. Number 15. A major network event and strong ratings. When TheStand premiered on ABC in 1994, it occupied primetime slots across 4 consecutive nights. The network heavily promoted it as a television event, and despite stiff competition from other shows that year, TheStand consistently drew high ratings. Its success paved the way for more Stephen King adaptations on network television, with stations realizing the strong viewership potential of King's large-scale stories. And there you have it, 15 fascinating insights into Stephen King's TheStand. From the novel's early roots and massive edits to the miniseries' unexpected casting changes and beyond, it's clear why this story continues to capture our imaginations. If you enjoyed learning about the secrets and history behind TheStand, be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments which fact surprised you the most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for more deep dives into the world of movies, books, and everything in between.